Jessica Le Mazurier in the newsroom. 1 week ago, as the dust was settling on the shootout that ended a 32-hour siege and killed the so-called shooter on the scooter in southwestern France, we were asking ourselves about the making of a French homegrown extremist. France 24 decided then to go to the housing projects where 23-year-old Mohamed Merah grew up. What our reporter found was a very rough council estate, a world unto its own, where the man who targeted French soldiers in a Jewish school comes across as a delinquent who, as he became more devout, remained highly erratic in his behavior. Lots of questions still unanswered. Did he act alone? What were his relations with French intelligence, which dropped its monitoring of Mohamed Merah a few months ago? More widely, what's the right way to prevent another ordeal of this kind, and what impact on France's presidential race 3 weeks ahead of the first round? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the fallout from Toulouse. With us from sister station Radio France International, Clea CAULCUTT, who covered it last week from there. Thanks for being with us. Jean-Charles BRISARD, consultant on security and terrorism issues, welcome. And James Cohen, who's asking, along with us last week, a lot of these same questions. He looks at immigrant communities and teaches political science at Paris's Sorbonne Nouvelle University. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can always weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, where our handle is @FrancoisF24. Now, before we look at what happened in Toulouse last week, there's, of course, the media fallout. We've seen in the past hours the controversy over whether or not to bury Mohamed Merah in his hometown, what kind of impact that'll have further on down the road. Now, speaking of further on down the road, there's also the images that he himself filmed during those shootouts we described. Let's go now to Doha. And Salah NEGM, news director for Al Jazeera in English. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. A couple of days ago, you were given the tapes Mohamed Merah filmed himself when he went on his shooting spree. Now, you elected not to show the images because of their graphic nature. Did you get a chance to see them yourself?
I saw the pictures myself. He filmed the person filmed the crimes. He didn't show himself at all, and we didn't broadcast it not only because its graphics nature, but also because it didn't carry any new information or news value to add to what happened and what we already know.
So the images that you saw give no clues as to who Mohamed Merah was?
It didn't show the person who was filming at all. It showed the crimes only.
Was it an easy decision to make? After all, you could have shown some sort of edited version.
No. There is no edited version, as I understand. If he edited himself, the person who filmed that, then this is a copy you got. And it's never an easy decision editorially if you get something of the sort. You have to consider the news value, the nature of the pictures, the validity of the information it carries. There are a series of measures that we take before reaching that decision.
And Salah NEGM, how did people where you are in the United Arab Emirates and in Doha and Qatar, how in the Gulf states did they react to what happened for what was really an unprecedented rampage here in France?
Really, I'm director of news for Al Jazeera English, and it's broadcasting globally, so I'm not in position to give you a background about the feeling of people here, but you can ask a reporter in the region.
But nonetheless, it must have been a topic of discussion in the newsroom as to why suddenly this was happening in France.
We dealt with it as any other news outlet, of course. We want to know the make of the person who is allegedly done this, the social circumstances they use in the political arena in France, and the effect on different groups in France itself, and the elections nearby, as you said, also how it's going to play there.
All right, Salah NEGM, I want to thank you for joining us, and thanks for telling us how it went on your end. Salah NEGM, news director for Al Jazeera in English. As we said at the top, France still coming to terms with the damage done by what turned out to be a homegrown jihadist with a juvenile delinquent's rap sheet. France 24's Karim Hakiki went to Toulouse. He filed this report, read by Catherine Norris-Trent.
Aged 23 years old, Mohamed Merah died in a hail of police bullets, having gunned down 7 victims. The man who became France's public enemy #1 grew up here, the BRISARD's estate in Toulouse. Everyone in this tough neighbourhood knew Mohamed Merah, but here many will only speak out in return for money. We refused and met some of the gunman's friends off camera.
It shocked me. It really shocked me. I was in bed sleeping, and my wife came in and said, "Guess who did it?" And I said, "What? Who is it?" And she said, "Mohamed." "No way," I said. So I got up and watched the TV, and I couldn't believe it. I grew up with him, ate at his house, grew up with his family. I know his sister Aisha, his older brothers. It's like we were brothers. We grew up together.
Stéphane knew Merah while he was growing up. As an adolescent, he was described as popular and full of energy, but he quickly fell into delinquence.
He was somebody who got on well with people, somebody who needed affection. You could tell he wanted to live positively, to enjoy being young, enjoy life's pleasures, having a laugh, teasing people. Sometimes you hated him, sometimes you loved him. That's what made him unique.
In 2007, Mohamed Merah was sentenced to 21 months in a French jail for theft. Dr. Alain Penin met him after he tried to commit suicide in prison.
He had no father, no reference point, problems with his identity. He needed psychological reassurance and had a fragility which made him impressionable, vulnerable to all kinds of influences.
By age 15, Merah had turned into the bad boy on the streets of his housing estate. His mother had lost any control over him, and he was assigned to a youth worker.
Il a un passé de petit délinquant, comme bien des jeunes dans les banlieues commettent des...
Like many youths from the suburbs, he had a history of petty crime, minor offenses like antisocial behavior, small-time theft.
L'expérience que j'ai eue de lui quand il devait passer devant...
In my experience of him, when he was called before the youth courts, he would write to the judge and say, "I can't come. Can I come another day, like a public holiday? That way I can go to work because I'd rather be working." He wrote letters like that. There was a deference about him, a respect for authority.
But prison seemed to harden the young Mohamed. Once released, he spent much of his time playing video games. His friends found his beliefs had become ingrained.
As a person, he was somebody who wouldn't accept defeat. He wanted to show through what he did in his daily life that he was a winner.
Behind bars, Mohamed Merah had discovered radical Islam. In his cell, he'd read the Quran every day.
He began to turn in on himself, and his religious beliefs became more radical. He was a fairly practicing Muslim. He observed Ramadan and started to go to prayer. When I asked him what his interests in life were, there was only one: reading the Quran. So by 2009, he had this heightened interest in the Quran.
Then, in 2010, Merah began travelling to Afghanistan and Pakistan, apparently by his own means. He claims to have been trained by Al-Qaeda in camps in the tribal zones. In his hometown, his friends say they don't know anything about these trips.
He had a shifting image. Monday he might be in football gear, Tuesday wearing the djellaba, Wednesday with his hair dyed blonde.
How do you explain him just exploding like that?
I don't know how it happened. I don't know whether he was brainwashed. On TV, they said he claimed to be from Al-Qaeda. But I think it's more that they said he's with us. He can't have been with Al-Qaeda. It's impossible.
Investigators are looking at whether Mohamed Merah acted alone in his killings or whether he had logistical support. His brother Abdelkader is being formally investigated for complicity in the attacks. And police are on the trail of a possible second accomplice.
Clea CAULCUTT, we see contradictory depictions of Mohamed Merah in that report. One person saying, he turned to Islam, and the other one describing him as somebody who would change every day. When you were covering the story last week and you spoke to neighbors, what sense did you get?
Well, the immediate neighbours, the ones in the Côte Pavée neighbourhood, didn't know Merah or didn't know him very well. The Côte Pavée neighbourhood is very quiet, it's very residential, quite well off. There's only the house that you see, the building that you see in the footage here, that's quite poor, so that people didn't know him. But I did meet young boys who came from the BRISARD neighbourhood to lend their support, or at least be present during the siege that took place. Now, their position was quite difficult. On the one hand, they were condemning the attacks. Clearly, they wanted to say Islam should not be confused with terrorism. We do not support his acts. At the same time, they were trying to explain that this behavior was not consistent with what they knew of him. They knew him as a young, friendly guy, somebody who went to discotheques, like dancing. And they also mentioned that maybe there were socio-economic reasons why he turned to fundamentalism. Maybe he wasn't given opportunities in life.
Jean-Charles BRISARD.
These contradictions, I would say, are quite usual in the jihadist world. If you look, for example, at 9/11 attacks, you remember Mohamed Merah, Ziad Jarrah, they were living like most of Western people, whether in Germany or in the United States. So one of the first lessons that they learn in training camps in Afghanistan or Pakistan is to manipulate, to be able to hide themselves, basically to act undercover. And that's exactly what it did. It's typical from jihadists.
When you look at those images, James Cohen, and the way Clea describes it, what you have is this one tiny neighborhood with projects, which is sort of this enclave, not far from a leafy middle-class suburb. Mm-hmm. Already there's one parallel universe there.
Right. Well, I'm inclined to want to complement all the explanations that have to do with his trajectory toward some sort of radicalism, which led him to Pakistan and Afghanistan. I would want to complement that with something more sociological, which would help us to understand how he got on this track in the first place. Apparently, there was some sort of stigmatization that he was feeling, some sort of deep form of alienation, and what exactly it was that triggered it and radicalized it to that point. I'm not qualified to say, but I think that at least you have to see out of what sort of social universe it grows. That's an important thing to do.
These working class suburbs of France regularly flare up. The last time in 2005, it was in the suburbs of Paris. You often go to those neighborhoods. How do people there cope? Unemployed young people cope with alienation regularly, usually?
You do see a lot of kids hanging around, waiting for something to happen, backs against the wall, or in engaging in drug dealing. I don't want to nourish the stereotypes that we have from French television, because there are a lot of people who study, who make an effort to leave that universe or at least to stay within it, but also succeed in life, and there are all kinds of different profiles. But among those profiles, I'm sure that you have people who feel in some sense that because of who they are, because of the class background that they have, and because of the ethnic and religious background that they have, they are stigmatized, that they're part of a category that French society doesn't want. And Merah apparently was in that category.
Jean-Charles BRISARD, from what we've learned in the past week, and there's a lot of contradictory information, as we saw in the report, neighbors asking for money to give their side of the story. It always sort of taints it as to what is the truth and what isn't. We've heard the authorities make mistakes. The timeline as to when he went to Afghanistan was confused at first. Now they're saying, 2010 was his first trip. Do you think you have a better sense of who he was?
Well, again, it's very difficult to tell because the investigation is underway. What we know for sure is that he is an homegrown terrorist, someone who self-radicalized probably, someone who, as I said before, followed a typical radicalization path from a strong background of criminality to prison and then to the training camps. But indeed, the investigation is still underway. He was a homegrown terrorist, but not a lone wolf, as we know tonight.
Not a lone wolf?
Not a lone wolf, no, I don't believe that. First, we're looking for accomplices, obviously. Other people were involved. And second thing, and the most important for me, is he already was provided with logistical support from the group or the cell that trained him in Pakistan. We don't know yet
what are the tangible signs of that logistical support?
The fact that, as the police said, and himself, I understand, he was trained by a group, obviously, in the Afpak region.
Because of his marksmanship, the arsenal of weapons that he had?
So he knew he was trained to use these weapons, and he was trained, obviously, to warfare, to combat, including a police force, elite force.
And what about his brother, 29-year-old Abdelkader? He's in custody, already known to security services for helping smuggle jihadist militants into Iraq back in 2007.
Well, yes, he was not directly involved. He was, at the time, taken into a large investigation taking place in Toulouse regarding a network to send jihadists in Iraq. So he was one of the supporters of the cell, but not an active member, obviously, of the cell because he was not indicted and not condemned.
Clea CAULCUTT, the information was very confused during that siege last week. And while it was confused, there was also, on top of that, the pressure of sort of the media feeding frenzy around the area.
Yeah, no, certainly. It was an odd mixture of the siege was very long. We were waiting around for hours on end. You never knew when the assault might take place. There was confusing information. Some medias did report, for example, that the assault was imminent or that Mohamed Merah had been arrested. So there was confusing information. I also think that one of our main sources of information at that point was the police. Claude Guéant, the Interior Minister, was also giving press releases, but the police and people had contacts within the police who would give information. Now, I also believe that at a time when you're trying to confuse Merah, which is what they were trying to do, they were trying to keep him awake all night during the siege to wear him down. It's possible that confusing information did come through to us as to when a siege was possible, when the assault was going to be given. So it was all getting the bare bones facts as to, for example, his identity, his name, was during the siege very difficult.
Right, a confusing situation. When we come back here in the France 24 debate, we'll be asking, could it have been avoided? Stay with us.